The math said Bumpy Johnson was a dead man. 12 of Dutch Schultz's best killers, one basement with no exit. A death warrant signed by the most violent mobster in New York. Everyone knew how this story was supposed to end. Bumpy Johnson riddled with bullets on a concrete floor. But Dutch Schultz made a fatal miscalculation. He didn't know he was locking his men in a cage with a lion. 90 minutes later, the firing stopped. 11 men were dead, and the only one allowed to walk out alive was carrying a message that would bring an empire to its knees. This is the true story of the night Bumpy Johnson became a ghost. The 22nd of September 1935, 11:42 p.m., a basement social club on 126th Street tucked behind a laundry front. The air in that room didn't just smell like stale tobacco and cheap gin. It smelled like fear. It was thick, heavy enough to choke a man. Up on the street, the world was quiet, but down here, 12 men were sweating through their wool suits. These weren't some two-bit stick-up kids. These were Dutch Schultz's personal mechanics, hard-faced hitters from the Bronx, packed with heaters and holding enough lead to sink a battleship. They were waiting. Shaking hands gripped the butts of revolvers. One guy, a greaseball named Frankie, couldn't stop tapping his foot against the concrete. Tap, tap, like a clock ticking down to midnight. And then the door at the top of the stairs creaked. Not a bang, not a kick, just a slow, deliberate groan of wood on iron. A single shadow stretched down those stairs, long and sharp as a razor. In that moment, Frankie stopped tapping. He looked at the man next to him and realized they'd made a terrible mistake. They had a choice: drop the guns and pray for a quick end, or try to kill a ghost. But why were 12 of New York's deadliest hitters shivering in a basement for just one man? Because Harlem was a gold mine. The numbers racket was printing millions, and the Queen of Harlem, Stephanie St. Clair, held the keys. Dutch Schultz wanted them. The Dutchman was a rabid dog in a three-piece suit. He tried brute force kidnappings, beatings, bodies in the street. He thought violence would make Harlem bow, but Queenie had an ace up her sleeve, an enforcer who played 4D chess while Dutch was playing checkers, Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy didn't just fight back, he embarrassed the Dutchman. Every time Dutch sent muscle, Bumpy sent them back in ambulances. He refused to pay the tax. He refused to kiss the ring. He made the powerful Dutch Schultz look weak in front of the 5 families. That was the last straw. Dutch lost his mind. He gathered his top 12 mechanics with one simple order. I don't want him hurt. I want him erased. Make Bumpy Johnson a ghost story. The man who stepped down the stairs wasn't sprinting, he wasn't yelling. Bumpy Johnson descended those steps like he was walking into a Sunday morning church service. He was wearing a midnight blue suit, tailored so sharp you could bleed just looking at it. His fedora was tilted perfectly. In his hand, nothing, or so it seemed. Frankie, the one with the nervous foot, leveled his Thompson submachine gun. That is far enough. Bumpy, you're a long way from home. Bumpy stopped on the bottom step. He didn't look at the guns. He looked at Frankie, his eyes as calm as a deep well. Home. Bumpy's voice was a low rumble like distant thunder over the Hudson. Son, I am Harlem. You're the ones who are lost. You're standing in my basement, breathing my air, and you didn't even have the manners to take off your hats. Shut up, another hitter yelled, his voice cracking. There is 12 of us and 1 of you. You do the math, Professor. Bumpy smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile a shark gives a minnow. I've done the math. I've been doing it since I saw you pull up in that black Buick 3 blocks away. I've done the math on the caliber of those guns, the speed of your reflexes, and the depth of the holes we're going to need to dig in the morning. The math says 11 of you are dead men. 1 of you, well, 1 of you has to stay alive to tell the Dutchman what happened. Kill him, Frankie screamed, but Bumpy was already moving, and Bumpy in motion was a sight to behold. He didn't reach for a gun first. He reached for the light switch. Click, total darkness. In a basement with no windows, that is a death sentence. The room exploded. The 12 hitters started panicking, the muzzle flashes of their own guns blinding them further. Boom, boom, boom. The sound was deafening in that confined space. They were shooting at shadows, shooting at each other, screaming in the dark, but Bumpy knew every inch of that room. He'd spent 2 hours there that afternoon, memorizing the distance from the stairs to the furnace to the support beam, the beam to the back door. He moved through the chaos like a ghost through a graveyard. You'd hear a wet thud, then a groan, a crack of bone, then silence. Bumpy wasn't using a Thompson. He was using a heavy-duty brass knuckle in one hand and a switchblade in the other. It was surgical. It was quiet. It was terrifying. One of Schultz's men, a big ox named Miller, managed to click on a flashlight. The beam cut through the smoke, and for a split second he saw Bumpy. Bumpy was standing over Frankie, poor, nervous Frankie, who was already gurgling his last breath. Bumpy's face wasn't angry. It was focused. It was the face of a man completing a difficult crossword puzzle. Miller tried to raise his pistol, but Bumpy was faster. He threw the switchblade with a flick of the wrist. It buried itself deep in Miller's throat. The flashlight hit the floor, spinning, casting wild, dizzying arcs of light across the carnage. 9, Bumpy whispered. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. 10, 11. When the smoke finally began to clear, and the only sound left was the hiss of a broken steam pipe, one man remained standing. It was a kid named Sal. Sal was young, barely 20, and he'd only been with the Schultz gang for a month. He was leaning against the back wall, his gun long gone, his hands shaking so hard he looked like he was vibrating out of his skin. He was covered in the blood of his friends, but he didn't have a scratch on him. The light flicked back on. Bumpy was standing by the stairs. His suit was still perfect, save for a single crimson splash on his cuff. He was lighting a cigarette, his hands steady as a surgeon's. He took a long drag, exhaled a cloud of blue smoke, and looked at Sal. Sal fell to his knees. "Please," he sobbed. "Please, Mr. Johnson. I didn't want to come. They made me, please." Bumpy walked over to him. Each footfall sounded like a hammer on a coffin lid. He stood over the boy, looking down with a mixture of pity and cold calculation. He reached into his pocket. Sal flinched, closing his eyes, waiting for the bullet. But the bullet never came. Instead, Bumpy pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper and a gold fountain pen. He wrote something down, folded it, and tucked it into Sal's top pocket. "Get up, Sal," Bumpy said. Sal looked up, his face a mask of tears and grime. You are letting me go." "I told you," Bumpy said, his voice dropping an octave. "I need a messenger, and you're the lucky winner. You're going to walk out of here. You're going to get in that Buick. You're going to drive back to Newark, and you're going to find Dutch Schultz. You're going to tell him that Harlem is a sovereign nation, and if he ever sends 12 men again, I'll send him back 24 in boxes." Bumpy leaned in close, his shadow swallowing the boy whole. "And Sal, if I ever see you north of 110th Street again, I won't need a messenger. Do you understand?" Sal nodded so hard his teeth rattled. "Yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Johnson." "Good. Now, look at that note." "Not now. When you get to Dutch, tell him it's a gift from the Queen." Sal scrambled to his feet and ran. He didn't look back. He ran up those stairs out into the Harlem night and drove like the devil himself was chasing him. 2 hours later, in a smoke-filled back room in Newark, Dutch Schultz was pacing. He was waiting for the call. He was waiting for the news that Bumpy Johnson was meat. When Sal burst through the door, white as a sheet and smelling like a slaughterhouse, Schultz stopped. "Where are the others?" Schultz demanded. Sal couldn't speak. He just shook his head, trembling, and handed Schultz the note. Dutch snatched it, his eyes darting across the paper. His face went from pale to beet red. He let out a scream of rage that could be heard 3 blocks away, ripping the paper into 1,000 pieces. You want to know what the message said. People say it was a poem. People say it was a map to Schultz's own secret stash. But the old heads who were there, the ones who heard it from Sal before he disappeared to the West Coast and changed his name, they say it was just one sentence. It said, "The numbers don't add up for you, Dutch. In Harlem, 12 minus 11 equals 0. That was Bumpy Johnson. He didn't just kill those men. He killed the Dutchman's reputation. He showed the world that the mob's iron grip stopped at the gates of Harlem. From that night on, Bumpy wasn't just an enforcer. He was a legend. He was the man who stood in the dark and made the monsters afraid. A month later, Dutch Schultz was gunned down in a chop house in Newark, babbling nonsense as his brain leaked out of his head. Some say it was the Italians. Some say it was internal. But if you ask anyone from the old neighborhood, they'll tell you the truth. Dutch Schultz died the moment he sent 12 men to a basement on 126th Street. That's how the story is told in the barbershops of Harlem. Did Bumpy really take out 12 men in the dark, or was it a strategic lie planted to terrify his enemies? The truth is, Dutch Schultz was paranoid and losing his mind. Whether it was bullets or psychological warfare, Bumpy Johnson had already won. Dutch died a month later, not by Bumpy's hand, but by his own commission. Bumpy won the battle for the basement. But the war for New York was just beginning, because while Dutch Schultz was bleeding out, a new king was rising in the east. A man calculating, cold, and far more dangerous than the Dutchman ever was. His name was Lucky Luciano. And what happened when Bumpy Johnson finally met Lucky Luciano? Well, that's a story for the next file in the Syndicate Archives. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the meeting that changed history.